Stephen Bedard here, and in this video we're going to look at the second chapter of the book of Revelation. Now, the letters to the seven churches that are found in Revelation 2 and 3 play an interesting part in the rest of Revelation and the people who read this book. For those who are really interested in end-time prophecy, these letters might be their least favorite part because it's just not that exciting. It doesn't tell you a whole lot of information about the end times. But for pastors and preachers, these are some of the most interesting chapters. I know for myself, as a pastor of a local church, I've preached through these letters twice, but I've not really preached through the rest of Revelation. These chapters really contain material that are fairly easy to preach from, where some of the other passages are a little bit more difficult. Now, some people have attempted to look at these letters and the correction that is given to each of the churches and to try to divide that up into different church ages and to say that this isn't about specific churches or congregations. Rather, it is about the church throughout history. That's probably not the case. I understand that there's an attraction to that, but it's really not that helpful for us. We should look at this as 7 letters to 7 real congregations in 7 different cities. So we're going to take a look at that. But before we do, we need to see that there is a common pattern that is found in each of these 7 letters. And Craig Keener, in his commentary on Revelation, really breaks it down very nicely. This is what he gives for the similar pattern for each of the 7 letters. First part is, to the angel of the church in a given city write, and then to the second part, Jesus, depicted in glory, often in terms from chapter 1, verses 13 to 18, says, I know, which in most cases offers some praise, and then, but I have this against you, and then offers some reproof where applicable, and then the one who has ears must pay attention to what the Spirit says, and then it concludes with an eschatological promise, and that's what we seem to see in each of these letters. So we're going to start with the letter to the church in Ephesus. And it actually makes sense that Ephesus is the first church that is addressed. It makes sense in 2 ways. One is it is the most geographically local to the island of Patmos. So if these letters are being sent from Patmos to each of these 7 churches, it would make sense it would begin at Ephesus. But it also makes sense because Ephesus was really the chief city in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. And so it would make sense that they would start in Ephesus from that way. It is interesting for us to read this letter because of all the different churches that we have in these chapters. Ephesus is really the one that we have the most New Testament information. If you are a reader of the New Testament, you have some idea of what is going on in Ephesus. You might not really know what's going on in Pergamum or Thyatira or some of these other cities, but we have an idea of Ephesus because we have the letter to the Ephesians. We have quite a bit of material in the book of Acts, and so we understand a little bit of what is going on. We also need to remember that Ephesus was one of the centers of emperor worship. And I need to speak a little bit about emperor worship. In general, the Romans were pretty tolerant when it came to religions. You were allowed to belong to pretty much whatever religion you wanted to be. They didn't really care if you worshiped Jupiter or Osiris or whoever. They just didn't care. But they did care if you did not worship the emperor. You had to give some kind of sense of worship to the emperor. You could go and do whatever else you want. You could even worship Jesus. but you needed to take some time to worship the emperor. It was a matter not just of religion, but of political loyalty. It was considered loyalty to Rome for that one day to burn a pinch of incense to the emperor, and it was expected that they would do that. And that was a problem because the Christians couldn't do that. That was not something that they were willing to do. The worshippers of Jupiter didn't mind, the worshippers of Osiris didn't mind, but the worshippers of Jesus did mind. Now, the Jews are a different story, and we're going to get into that in a moment, but you have to realize this is one of the challenges that's going on here. So the correction that Jesus has for the Ephesians is that they have lost the love that they had at the beginning. Now, I always read this as being their love for God, because we can all identify if we've had some kind of conversion experience, we had this intense love for God, and then at some point we seem to cool down in that. We get used to just the religious life, and it's not as intense. And that's part of what is going on, but that is not the only thing that is going on. It can also refer to the love that Christians have for one another, because that kind of love gets less intense as well. And really, we don't have to choose between the two. When someone came to Jesus and asked what the most important commandments were, he made it clear it was about loving God and loving our neighbor. And so it's actually never meant to separate our love for God and our love for people. And so it's probable that the Ephesians were losing their first love for both. And then we have this warning about the Nicolaitans. Now, who are the Nicolaitans? I have no idea. And to be honest, scholars don't know either. There are lots of theories about who the Nicolaitans are. Irenaeus, who was an early church apologist, he linked the Nicolaitans to Nicholas from Acts chapter 6, but we don't really know. He likely was just guessing at that point. And so we don't really need to know the details of it, but it was a problem that was going on. The overcoming that Jesus expects for the Ephesians is that they would return to their first love for God and their first love for people. And then we move on to our next church and city, which is that of Smyrna. Now, along with Pergamum, they vied with Ephesus to be the premier city in Asia Minor. And so there was a lot of competition that was going on here. They also were known for emperor worship. It was a place that was where a lot of that was going on, and it was definitely expected in that area. Now, there is something in this letter that is kind of troubling, and that is the reference to the Jews and the synagogue of Satan. And you can totally see how this passage could be used in a very anti-Semitic way to speak badly of the Jews and to refer to their synagogue as the synagogue of Satan. And it has been abused. This passage definitely has been used in unhealthy ways. So what is going on? How can we understand this, taking into account the original historical background, but also being aware of anti-Semitic tendencies throughout our history? Well, it goes back to what we were talking about before about emperor worship and how there was an expectation that everyone in the empire would have to worship the emperor. That was all except for the Jews. The Jews had an option not to do that. They were the only ones who didn't have to worship the emperor. They had special permission for that. Now, originally, the Christians were understood to be a sect of Judaism. And so for the beginning part, they actually were able to take advantage of that option that the Jews had. So they did not have to worship the emperor. But by the time of Revelation, we are getting to the point where Christianity is separating from Judaism, and the Jews are actually seeing the Christians as causing some problems because there are increased tensions between the Christians and the Romans, And the Jews are in a rough situation as well, because this letter is being written after the Jewish war against Rome that took place in 67 to 70 AD, which resulted in the destruction of Jerusalem and the Jewish temple. And that wasn't the end of the conflict, because there would be another Jewish war early in the 2nd century as well. And so the Jews really had some tense relationships with the Romans, and the Christians seemed to be making it worse for them from their perspective anyways. And so they were trying to make it clear to the Romans that the Christians were not a part of the Jews, and that they did not deserve to have that legal loophole of not worshiping the emperor. And so that was causing some problems. And so remember, the name Satan is not a name, actually, it's a title, which means accuser. And so really they're accusing people of not being Jews and not being a part of their group and not having the rights that the Jews had there. So that really is what is going on. There's a reference here to crowns, which are likely laurel wreaths or wreaths made of something similar, which were often used as signs of victory. And that is what they are asked to do. They are asked to fight for the victory, not fight with violence, but to withstand persecution, that they are experiencing persecution by the Romans, who are trying to get them to worship the emperor. They are to persevere in their faith and to not give in. And then the last one we have in the 2nd chapter is Pergamum. And there's some interesting things in this letter. It refers to the throne of Satan, and it talks about this is the place where Satan dwells. So does that mean that we could go today to the ruins of Pergamum and we could find Satan's throne, and we could find the location to the actual Satan? Well, yes and no. The throne of Satan that is being mentioned here is likely a giant throne that was built for Zeus the Savior. That's how Zeus is referred to in that particular monument. And it has snakes all over it, which links it back, of course, to Satan as a serpent, which we will see later on in Revelation. And Zeus being the chief god, he's the same god as Jupiter, and the Greek name being Zeus. And of course, we are in the Greek area here. And that is probably what is being referred to when it comes to the throne of Satan. And then it also talks about Balaam, and this is an example of something else that happens in these letters. It references to the Old Testament, and we will see talk about Jezebel, but here we have a reference to Balaam. And Balaam in the Old Testament, there's a lot of things that happen in his story, but one of the things he does is he tells the people that he's working for, he's being paid to bring Israel down. He tries to prophesy a curse on Israel, but God won't give him that. So he tells the enemies of Israel, if you want them to be defeated, you need to encourage them to embrace sinful practices, and God will withdraw from them, and then you'll be able to defeat them militarily. That's what Balaam did in the Old Testament. And that seems to be what's being talked about here, is that the Christians are being encouraged to fall into sinful practices. And so that whoever it is who's doing this within the church is following the example of Balaam. One of the temptations that seems to be happening to the Christians in Pergamum is their rule in whatever trade they belong to, because there were trade guilds at that time. And these trade guilds were not just like local unions that we would have today, but they had a heavy religious emphasis. And so there would be meals that would be a part of this trade guild, which would include celebrations to the various pagan gods, probably including Zeus, who is likely referred to there in the throne of Satan. And this put the Christians in Pergamum in a very difficult situation. If they were to continue on in their trade, they would have to be a part of the trade guild. But if they're a part of the trade guild, they have to do things that go against their faith, and their faith needs to be number one. And so that's part of the thing that's going on here. It's a challenge for them. You can imagine the difficulty that would be for them. The overcoming that is expected for them is for them to continue steadfastly in the face of opposition, that they not give up. There's also a reference here to a white stone that would be given to them. There's all kinds of theories about that. One that I like, and I don't know if it is indeed the correct explanation, but the one that I like is that in ancient legal practices in that area, in a court case, a stone would be given, and a white stone would represent acquittal, and a black stone would represent conviction. And this could be a reference to say that even though the pagan pressure there is for them to be found guilty, the judgment of God is that they have been acquitted and that they are free. So that is possibly what is going on. Also talks about them being given a new name, and that also has an Old Testament reference that goes back to Isaiah chapter 6 verse 2, which refers to the people of God receiving a new name. And this is a part of the ongoing theme of Revelation that calls back to the Old Testament and is continually pointing us back to things that have happened in the past. So as we've seen in these letters here, these are really important, and it's too bad in a way that those who are interested in prophecy are often not interested in these letters, because when you look at Old Testament prophecy, these letters actually are firmly placed in the genre of prophecy, because prophecy in the Old Testament is not in 2,000 years, this is what's going to happen. Rather, Old Testament prophecy is, these are God's expectations. You have been slipping in that. You need to get your act together, repent, start doing things the way they're supposed to, and God will accept that. And that's really the message of the letters that we have looked at already, and we're going to see more when we go to the next chapter. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to the channel and visit me at stephenjbedard.com.